Welcome to Stoic Maxima Path. I'm glad you're here, because today's conversation may quietly change the way you see yourself and the way others experience you. Most men believe intelligence is something you display. They think it lives in fast answers, sharp opinions, and always having something to say. But the truly intelligent men I've known operate by a very different rule. Their power is not in speaking more. It's in knowing exactly when silence is the stronger move. There is a kind of authority that doesn't announce itself. You feel it when someone enters a room and doesn't rush to dominate the conversation. They listen, they observe, they choose their words carefully, or sometimes they choose not to use any at all. This restraint is not weakness, it is discipline, and discipline is one of the core pillars of Stoic wisdom. Stoicism never taught men how to impress others with words. It taught them how to govern themselves. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, wrote his reflections not for an audience but for himself. He understood something many men today forget. Every word you speak either strengthens your credibility or quietly erodes it. There is no neutral ground. Intelligent men are painfully aware of this, which is why they treat speech like a limited resource rather than an endless reflex. I've spent years watching how men speak in moments that matter. In meetings, in arguments, in relationships, in silence, and a pattern emerges very clearly. The men who feel the need to fill every pause are usually the least secure. Silence makes them uncomfortable because it forces them to sit with their own thoughts. On the other hand, the men who are comfortable with silence are rarely ignored. Their words land harder precisely because they don't waste them. This is where many men go wrong. They mistake silence for passivity. They think that if they don't speak up immediately, they'll lose ground or appear less capable. Stoicism flips this belief on its head. It teaches that control begins internally. If you cannot control the impulse to speak, you are already being controlled by it. Epictetus warned that freedom belongs only to the man who is master of himself. Speech is one of the first battlegrounds where that mastery is tested. When you speak too quickly, you reveal your emotional state. You show urgency, insecurity, or the need for validation. When you pause, you create space. And in that space, something powerful happens. Others project confidence onto you. They listen more closely. They take you seriously. Not because you demanded respect, but because you embodied it. Intelligent men also understand that silence protects them. Words spoken in haste cannot be retrieved. A careless sentence can undermine years of earned trust. A defensive remark can expose insecurity you didn't intend to reveal. Stoic discipline teaches men to slow down, not because life is slow, but because clarity requires it. The man who speaks only after reflection is far harder to manipulate, provoke, or disarm. This doesn't mean intelligent men are quiet all the time. It means they are intentional. When they speak, there is alignment between thought and word. They don't talk just to be seen. They speak because something meaningful needs to be said. And when nothing meaningful is required, they remain silent without discomfort. There is also a deeper reason. Stoicism values restraint. Every unnecessary word pulls you outward. It ties your sense of self to how others respond. Silence, on the other hand, pulls you inward. It strengthens self-command. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he did not need applause to live rightly. The same applies here. You do not need to be heard constantly to be respected. Often, the opposite is true. As we move through this training, we're going to examine 7 phrases intelligent men never say, not because they are flawless or superior, but because experience taught them that these words lead nowhere good. Each phrase seems harmless on its own. Some even sound confident or reasonable, but beneath them lie habits that weaken judgment, credibility, and self-mastery. This first lesson is the foundation. Before we examine specific phrases, you must understand the principle behind them. Intelligence is not loud, wisdom is not reactive, and strength does not rush to announce itself. The Stoic path begins with restraint, with learning to pause, with choosing silence when silence protects your integrity. If you can master this, everything else becomes easier. Your words gain weight, your presence gains gravity, and your mind becomes quieter, clearer, and harder to disturb. That is where real authority is born, not from what you say, but from what you refuse to say when lesser men would speak. There is one phrase that slips out of a man's mouth more easily than he realizes. It often sounds harmless, even confident. Sometimes it's said with a smile, sometimes with impatience. But every time it appears, it quietly reveals something dangerous. The phrase is this: I already know that. Intelligent men learn, often the hard way, to remove these words from their vocabulary. On the surface, saying, I already know that, feels efficient. It signals experience, it suggests competence. But beneath it lies a closed door. The moment a man convinces himself there is nothing left to learn, growth stops. Not loudly, not dramatically. It stops quietly, disguised as certainty. I learned this lesson early in my career while working with a mentor who spoke very little but observed everything. He had the calm presence of someone who had lived through enough mistakes to no longer fear them. One afternoon, we were reviewing a process I had repeated dozens of times. As he began explaining a detail, I interrupted him without thinking and said, "Yeah, I already know that." He didn't correct me. He didn't argue. He simply looked at me for a moment and moved on. That look stayed with me far longer than any lecture could have. Later that evening, I realized what I had done. I hadn't just interrupted him. I had robbed myself of perspective I didn't yet possess. His experience contained things that weren't written in manuals or taught in training sessions. They were lessons earned through failure, pressure, and time. By declaring that I already knew, I chose pride over curiosity. Stoicism cuts directly through this illusion. Marcus Aurelius warned himself repeatedly that the ego is the enemy of understanding. When you believe you already know, you stop listening. And when you stop listening, you stop seeing reality clearly. The Stoics never confused intelligence with certainty. They understood that certainty is often a defense mechanism, not a sign of wisdom. Truly intelligent men approach life as students, not performers. They don't need to demonstrate knowledge at every opportunity. They understand that learning is not a trophy you win and display. It's a river that keeps moving. You can stand in the same place, but the water is never the same twice. Even familiar ideas change when seen through a new set of eyes. I once watched a master craftsman listen patiently as a young apprentice explained a technique he had perfected decades earlier. The older man nodded, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked him for sharing. Later, I asked why he didn't simply say he already knew all of that. He smiled and said, "Sometimes you learn more from how someone sees something than from the thing itself." That is wisdom without ego. When a man says, "I already know that," he sends a subtle message to everyone around him. He says, "I am finished growing." People sense this immediately. They stop offering insight. They stop challenging him, not out of respect, but out of resignation. Over time, this man becomes stagnant while believing he is standing still on solid ground. Stoicism teaches the opposite posture. It teaches humility as strength, not false humility that shrinks itself, but grounded humility that remains open. Epictetus reminded his students that progress begins the moment you realize how much remains beyond your understanding. The wise man doesn't fear appearing ignorant for a moment because he values clarity more than image. There is also a deeper danger hidden inside this phrase. "I already know that" often masks insecurity. It is used to protect identity, to avoid feeling exposed, to maintain an image of competence. But Stoic discipline asks a different question. Would you rather protect your ego or improve your judgment? You cannot do both at the same time. Intelligent men learn to replace this phrase with silence, curiosity, or a simple acknowledgement. They listen not because they must, but because they understand that every interaction carries the possibility of insight. Even repetition has value. It sharpens understanding. It reveals nuance. It tests whether knowledge has been integrated or merely memorized. If you catch yourself feeling impatient when someone explains something familiar, pause. Ask yourself what is really being threatened, your time or your identity. Most of the time, it's the latter. And once you see that, the impulse to interrupt begins to lose its power. Stoicism calls this mastery of the self, the ability to set aside pride in favor of clarity, the strength to remain a student of life, regardless of age, status, or experience. This kind of intelligence doesn't need to announce itself. It reveals itself over time through sound judgment, calm presence, and the ability to learn without defensiveness. In the next section, we'll examine another phrase that sounds practical, but quietly limits a man's future. A phrase that often disguises fear as realism and shuts doors before they are ever tested. There is another sentence: intelligent men learn to remove from their speech, not because it is always false, but because of what it reveals when spoken too quickly. The sentence is simple: that's impossible. On the surface, it sounds reasonable, cautious, even mature. But most of the time, it is not a conclusion reached through careful judgment. It is fear wearing the mask of logic. I once worked alongside a man who was widely respected. He was experienced, articulate, and trusted with responsibility. Whenever new ideas surfaced, whether it was changing a process, entering a new market, or approaching a difficult client differently, his response came almost instantly: that's impossible. At first, people nodded. It sounded grounded, responsible. But over time, something became clear. Nothing new ever happened around him, not because opportunity was absent, but because possibility was dismissed before it could be examined. The Stoics understood this pattern well. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. What appears impossible is often unfamiliar, not unachievable. The mind, when faced with uncertainty, seeks safety. Declaring something impossible gives the illusion of control. It ends the conversation, it removes responsibility, and most importantly, it protects us from the discomfort of trying. But Stoicism does not confuse comfort with wisdom. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that obstacles are not signals to retreat, but material for growth. The problem is rarely the obstacle itself. The real barrier is the story we tell ourselves about it. When a man says, "that's impossible," he is often describing his own limits, not the limits of reality. I saw this firsthand years later on a project that, by every conventional measure, should have failed. The budget was thin, the timeline was aggressive, the team was inexperienced. Every rational instinct told me to walk away. And yet, instead of labeling it impossible, I asked a different question. What is the next small thing I can control today? Not the entire outcome, just the next step. That shift changed everything. We didn't perform miracles. We didn't overcome reality. We worked within it, one small action at a time. And that project became one of the most successful I've ever been part of. Not because conditions were perfect, but because we refused to surrender before beginning. Intelligent men understand something crucial here. Saying, "that's impossible," is often a way of declaring defeat without risking failure. It feels safer than saying, "I don't know how yet." But those two sentences lead to very different lives. One closes doors, the other invites exploration. Stoic courage is not reckless optimism, it is disciplined persistence. It doesn't deny difficulty, it simply refuses to be paralyzed by it. Epictetus taught that we are not disturbed by events themselves, but by our judgments about them. When you label something impossible too quickly, you are choosing a judgment that limits action before reality has spoken. There is also a quiet arrogance hidden inside this phrase. To say something is impossible assumes you fully understand the situation, all variables, and every potential outcome. Very few people ever do. Intelligent men remain aware of how little they truly see. That awareness keeps them flexible, curious, willing to test rather than dismiss. Notice the men who grow over time. They don't rush to conclusions, they ask better questions. They replace "that's impossible" with "what would it take?" or "what part of this is actually within my control?" These questions keep the mind active rather than defensive. They turn challenges into problems to be worked, not walls to hide behind. Stoicism does not promise easy victories. It promises inner strength. And inner strength shows itself most clearly when a man stands in front of something difficult and resists the urge to retreat mentally. Saying "that's impossible" often feels like realism, but realism without effort is just resignation. Life will ask difficult things of you. That is unavoidable. The moment you label those demands as impossible, you absolve yourself of responsibility and surrender growth at the same time. But the man who takes the next step, no matter how small, opens paths others never see. In the next section, we'll examine a phrase that appears defensive but is far more damaging than most men realize. A sentence that pushes power away while pretending to protect pride. There is a sentence that sounds protective, even reasonable, but quietly strips a man of his strength every time he uses it. The sentence is, "That's not my fault." It often appears when things go wrong, when pressure rises, when reputation feels threatened, and in the moment, it can feel justified. But intelligent men learn that this phrase, more than almost any other, pushes power away instead of preserving it. Responsibility is often misunderstood. Many people confuse it with blame, shame, or punishment. The Stoics did not see it that way. To them, responsibility was not about admitting guilt. It was about reclaiming influence. Because the moment you refuse responsibility, even partially, you hand control of the situation to someone else. I watched this play out years ago with a colleague who lost a major client. Objectively, several factors were at play. The market had shifted, expectations were unclear, deadlines had been tight, and yet, every time the issue came up, his response was immediate and firm. "That's not my fault." He explained why the client was unreasonable, why his team failed him, why circumstances were stacked against him. And while every explanation contained some truth, something else happened quietly in the background. He never changed. The same patterns repeated, the same results followed. What he didn't realize was that by defending himself so thoroughly, he had removed the one thing that could have altered his future. The ability to ask, "What could I have done differently?" Not because he was wrong, but because growth lives inside that question. Stoicism teaches a ruthless clarity here. Epictetus said that what happens to you is not as important as how you respond to it. When you say, "That's not my fault," you are saying that change must come from somewhere else, from other people, from better conditions, from luck. And while that may feel comforting, it places your future outside your control. Intelligent men understand a hard truth. Responsibility is power. The more responsibility you are willing to carry, the more control you regain. This does not mean accepting blame for everything. It means identifying where your influence begins and refusing to pretend it doesn't exist. In my own life, the moments of real progress never came from proving I was right. They came from moments where I asked uncomfortable questions. Did I communicate clearly? Did I prepare enough? Did I ignore early warning signs? Even when others made larger mistakes, owning my portion gave me leverage. It allowed me to adjust, to improve, to move forward, instead of staying stuck in justification. The Stoics believed that life would always present difficulty. The goal was not to avoid it, but to respond with discipline and reason. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to focus only on what lay within his control. Blame lies outside it. Choice does not. There is also a deeper emotional cost to this phrase. When a man repeatedly says, "That's not my fault," he trains himself to be reactive rather than deliberate. He waits for others to change. He waits for fairness. He waits for validation, and waiting slowly becomes a habit. Over time, This man feels unlucky, misunderstood, and resentful, without realizing that he has given up authorship of his own outcomes. Intelligent men choose a different posture. They ask, "What part of this belongs to me?" even when the answer is small. Especially when the answer is small, because small adjustments compound. They restore agency. They rebuild trust, both internally and externally. Responsibility also changes how others perceive you. A man who owns his part, calmly and without theatrics, becomes someone others rely on. Not because he is perfect, but because he is grounded. He doesn't waste energy defending an image. He invests energy improving reality. Stoicism never asked men to be passive. It asked them to be accountable, not to events, but to their responses. The man who abandons the phrase, "That's not my fault," does not become weaker. He becomes harder to shake. He stops arguing with the past and starts shaping the future. In the next section, we'll look at a phrase that sounds strong on the surface, but often hides pride and isolation beneath it. A sentence many men admire, yet few truly understand the cost of saying. There is a phrase that sounds strong, independent, even admirable, yet quietly weakens the man who repeats it. The phrase is, "I don't need any help." Society often praises this posture, the self-made man, the lone figure who carries everything alone. But Stoic wisdom exposes a deeper truth. Refusing help is rarely strength. More often, it is pride disguised as resilience. Many men learn early that needing others is a liability. They are taught to handle problems silently, to absorb pressure without complaint, to solve everything on their own. Over time, this belief hardens into identity. Asking for help begins to feel like failure. Admitting uncertainty feels like exposure, and so they choose isolation, believing it preserves dignity. The Stoics rejected this illusion. They understood human beings as social creatures by nature. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that he was part of a larger whole, not separate from it. Strength, in the Stoic sense, was never about standing alone. It was about standing rightly within a community. History offers powerful examples of this. Abraham Lincoln is often remembered as a solitary figure, burdened by responsibility, carrying a nation through its darkest hours. But what is less celebrated is how deeply he relied on others. He surrounded himself with advisors who disagreed with him. He sought counsel precisely because he understood that wisdom does not emerge from isolation. It is refined through challenge. Lincoln's cabinet was famously called a team of rivals, men with opposing views, strong egos, and conflicting strategies. He did not see their disagreement as a threat. He saw it as a resource. That choice did not make him weaker. It made him effective. The Stoics held the same view. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man in the world at the time, openly acknowledged how much he owed to his teachers, friends, and mentors. In his private writings, he named them one by one, crediting the virtues they helped shape in him. The emperor did not pretend to be self-made. He understood that no one is. When a man says, "I don't need any help," what he often means is, "I don't want to appear vulnerable." But vulnerability is not weakness. It is honesty, and honesty is a prerequisite for growth. Epictetus taught that no man is free who is not master of himself. But mastery does not mean isolation. It means knowing your limits without being ruled by them. I've seen the cost of this phrase firsthand. There was a period in my life when I believed carrying everything alone was the same as being strong. Work, family, expectations. I absorbed it all quietly. I told myself I had it under control. But control slowly turned into exhaustion. Clarity faded. Resentment grew. Not because life was unfair, but because I refused to share the load. The turning point came when I admitted to someone I trusted that I couldn't do it alone. What I expected was judgment. What I found was relief, perspective, support. That moment didn't weaken me. It restored me, and it taught me something the Stoics understood centuries ago. Strength multiplies when shared wisely. There is also a relational cost to refusing help. When you deny others the chance to support you, you deny them purpose. You cut off reciprocity. Healthy relationships are built on mutual contribution, not silent endurance. The man who never asks for help eventually finds himself surrounded by people who no longer offer it. Intelligent men learn to distinguish independence from isolation. Independence means choosing your path. Isolation means refusing connection. One builds resilience, the other erodes it. Stoicism never taught men to be lone wolves. It taught them to be disciplined participants in a larger order. Asking for help requires courage. It requires setting aside the image of invulnerability. It requires trust. And trust is not weakness, it is discernment. You do not ask everyone. You ask wisely. You choose carefully. And in doing so, you preserve strength instead of performing it. The man who releases this phrase does not become dependent. He becomes balanced. He understands that self-mastery includes knowing when to lean and when to stand. He no longer confuses silence with strength. In the next section, we will examine a phrase that quietly convinces men that growth has an expiration date. A sentence that turns time into an excuse and possibility into resignation. There is a sentence that rarely sounds dramatic, yet it quietly closes more doors than failure ever could. The sentence is, "I'm too old for that." It often arrives disguised as realism, sometimes even as humor. But beneath its calm surface lies resignation, a belief that life has already delivered its best chapters and whatever remains is merely repetition. Intelligent men learn to be suspicious of this thought, not because age is meaningless, but because using age as a reason to stop growing is a form of self-betrayal. It turns experience into a prison instead of a resource. And once that mindset settles in, curiosity fades, courage weakens, and the future quietly shrinks. Stoic philosophy never treated age as a limit to purpose. Marcus Aurelius reflected constantly on mortality, not to surrender to it, but to sharpen his sense of responsibility. The question was never how much time remained. The question was how fully one lived within the time given. As long as breath remains, so does duty, so does growth. "I'm too old for that" is rarely about the body. More often, it is about fear. Fear of looking foolish, fear of starting again, fear of discovering that one still has much to learn. And so the mind reaches for a convenient excuse. Age becomes the shield that protects the ego from discomfort. But history does not reward that thinking. There are countless examples of men who began new chapters long after society expected them to settle into decline, not because they ignored reality, but because they refused to let time decide their ceiling. They understood something essential. Growth does not stop with age, it ripens. There is a difference between wisdom and withdrawal. Wisdom uses experience to choose better paths. Withdrawal uses experience to justify standing still. Intelligent men choose the former. They ask a different question, not, "Am I too old?" but "What is possible now with what I know?" I have seen this distinction play out many times. Men in their later years who decide to mentor, to learn a new craft, to speak honestly for the first time in their lives, and others, younger by decades, who have already surrendered internally, convinced that change belongs to someone else. The difference is not time, it is mindset. Stoicism teaches that nature itself is change. To resist change is to fight reality. Every phase of life carries different strengths. Youth brings energy, age brings clarity. Experience sharpens judgment, resilience deepens. These are not signs of decline, they are tools, refined over time. When a man tells himself he is too old to try, he is often protecting himself from the vulnerability of beginning. Beginning exposes gaps. It reveals uncertainty, but it also opens possibility. And Stoic courage has never been about comfort. It has always been about alignment with truth. The danger of this phrase is subtle. It does not shout. It whispers. It convinces a man to delay, then retreat. Then observe life instead of participating in it. Over time, that withdrawal hardens into identity. This is just how things are now. And without realizing it, he has surrendered authorship of his own story. Intelligent men reject that surrender. They understand that life does not ask whether something is convenient. It asks whether something is worth doing. And worth is not measured by age. It is measured by meaning. Growth in later years often looks different. It is quieter, less performative, but it is no less real. Learning becomes selective. Effort becomes intentional. Action becomes deliberate. This is not decline. It is refinement. The Stoics believed that each stage of life carried its own obligations, not to chase youth, but to embody virtue where you are, to contribute what you can, to live fully, not nostalgically. When a man accepts this, age stops being an excuse and becomes an asset. The phrase, "I'm too old for that," dissolves when replaced with a better one. What is the next right step for me now? That question keeps a man alive internally. It keeps him moving forward, even as the years pass. In the next section, we will examine a phrase that feels harmless, even responsible, but quietly steals time from the present. A sentence that postpones life itself under the illusion of patience.